Welcome and thank you for joining us today. Today's topic is developing your corporate culture with work from home teams. Having a work from home or hybrid workforce is certainly a great way to recruit top talent beyond the geographically limited pool of your backyard. But how do you develop the corporate culture you want and imprint those shared organizational values that you want when people aren't in the same physical space? In the hot seat today is going to be Randall Craig fielding questions. So a little bit about Randall. He has founded several successful startups. He held a long-time position at a Big Four consulting firm. He was a senior executive at an American public company. He's the author of 8 books and in the Speaker Hall of Fame. He's helped over 100 organizations scale, and he works with me at the Brain Trust Professional Institute, helping organizations grow their businesses. So, Randall, in your experience leading remote and hybrid teams, what are some considerations for leaders about how to create the corporate culture that they want?
I think it's important to go back to the olden days where people were expected to show up at 9, sit in their office, leave at 5 or 6 or whatever the time was. Um, in Search of Excellence many years ago, popularized the term management by wandering around, MBWA. And as that happens, you sort of sprinkle, you learn what's going on, you have these conversations. And in fact, a lot of the olden day culture was actually reinforced by these serendipitous conversations, the water cooler conversations, or you overhear somebody say something and you just chime in. Um, and that was all these things were great reinforcements of culture because everybody was actually in the same place and there's a lot of modeling of what you actually wanted to have happen. Um, and what ended up happening there is a lot of people, a lot of managers ended up managing by time, not by task. Okay, which was a massive problem when COVID came years ago, when all of a sudden you couldn't see people, right? And you had to learn as a manager that you had to manage by task. Hey, we need something done by such and such time. And you didn't have the ability to sort of wander around and sort of see the process or provide any coaching or frankly model the kind of culture that the organization wanted and everything. And sadly, that became very frustrating. And from the individual contributor's perspective, it was very tough. We've seen all kinds of examples of people who are double dipping, okay, who effectively held two jobs at the same time. And when asked about, well, isn't that a little bit unethical? The answer was, well, listen, my manager gave me a whole bunch of work. I did it. So I had extra time. So why can't I do something else? If they want more of my time, they should frankly give me more work to do. Now, obviously, that sort of totally steps aside the fact that it's every individual's responsibility to look for the experiences that will enrich their job, their experience, their capabilities, that stretch their mind. We don't all sort of work at the post office to use an expression. But as a result of that, there's been a lot of dysfunction. And that's one of the reasons why this work from home thing is particularly challenging. And it's made worse, by the way, post-COVID, when you've got senior leadership saying everybody's got to be in the office, and employees saying, "Hey, 1 second here. I'm not so sure I really want that anymore." Right? I love the idea of working from home. I can save all this time, no 1 hour transit in the big city back and forth, no a bit of flexibility to deal with kids and other personal things. As long as the work gets done, who cares if I do it at night or in the middle of the day or in the crack of dawn? And so you've got almost a disconnect from senior leadership in some cases, who want to see, bums in seats literally in the office because that might be what they're used to. Managers, on the other hand, not everybody who feels comfortable managing by task, and certainly the question of embedding culture and building a powerful culture when there's a work from home or a hybrid environment, that's something that they're not sure, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And finally, the individual people themselves are saying, well, I'm by myself all day. How do I sort of participate in this culture? Even know what it is? I don't even know what it is. I'm just, so what I wanted to share is, a number of ideas, and every organization is different, and so take from this list, kind of what makes sense. And so, probably number one is is setting certain expectations. I'm not talking about productivity expectations, but just general expectations. With respect to commitment level or double dipping or any of those kinds of things that you see, right? And also setting expectations as managers and leaders of yourself. Okay, how are you actually reinforcing this? How are you actually modeling the behaviors and modeling the culture that you want other people to adopt? And this is far, far more important. It's a question of do what you see that I'm doing, not just what I say that what I'm saying. But sometimes it's also, what are you saying? Even if it's an aspirational, this is what we need to be doing. It's very important. So, having senior leadership being 100% aligned and modeling the culture is probably the most important thing. Doesn't mean, for example, that, maybe the senior leadership does need to be in the office all the time, right? But how do they model the culture where they're able to get the best people from whatever city or place they happen to be and form a team that way? Um, I also would suggest that sometimes senior leaders, it's very hard because sometimes no one tells them anything. And you think as a senior leader, you kind of know what's going on. And, the people that work, for your staff won't always say to your face, this is kind of what's going on because, that causes problems too. So, sometimes, where are you learning from, right? Where are you getting the sort of the ability to sort of touch base. And then Rania, I mean, part of this is kind of the question, well, where does coaching come in? I think the second problem really, and the second sort of reinforcement mechanism is what are the managers doing, underneath the leadership. Are they skilled at the people side of the business, or are they completely task focused, right? Are they skilled at working with people remotely? Are they still managing by the minute and rather than by the task? Are they comfortable building relationships and maintaining relationships over Zoom or Teams, etc., or are they only comfortable doing so in person? Finally, who taught them the skills of managing? Was it just by accident that they became managers? Were they amazing individual contributors? They were promoted into management, and then they're just scraping, figuring that out? Or have you taught them some management skills, right? So it might not be a question of work from home issue, but it might be a question of management skill issue. And finally, I think the question is, are these managers who are individual employees as well, are they modeling the culture that the organization wants? So, for example, are they getting a lot of pressure from their bosses, okay, about work from home one way or the other? Excuse me. Are they just, are they, um, do they have a good sort of handle on how to manage up, not just manage down or manage with peers? I think it's also a question of what the individual contributors are actually doing. And is there support from the organization as a whole to say, listen, we've decided on a hybrid or work from home model. Are we actually providing support to people? Okay, if you need to actually bring them into the head office, are you paying for them to come? Okay, if are you expecting them to buy their own big monitor so when they move their laptop back and forth to the office that they're not looking at it? Or are you expecting them to schlep the big monitor back and forth themselves, right? So there's that kind of thing and that's just a simple example, but are you actually providing the support so they can be productive and don't feel like they're being taken advantage because um, they happen to be working from home? I guess there's another thing. How about those employees who actually don't have a proper workspace, but you're requiring them to work from home all that time, and it becomes very difficult. Just as an aside, I was having a conversation the other day with somebody who said, I'm so glad my family, we just moved into a house because my office for the last 3 years, and my office for the last 3 years was my computer was like in my underwear drawer in my dresser with a little table in front of it that every single morning and every single night I had to pack it away and move everything away so I can get into my dresser to get my clothes. right? That wasn't that's not what I'd say the most efficient kind of place for somebody to be actually working. But we make this assumption that because there's so many so-called advantages for work from home, that everybody absolutely wants to do it and they've got a place to do it, and that's not a reasonable expectation. It's a good general expectation, assumption, but it's not one that's specific. So what can we do to support people who've got a work from home environment? Um, so reinforcement mechanisms. There's some things that can help. The idea of a daily stand-up meeting with the team. And that's a very simple thing. Everyone sort of gets the microphone, if you will, for 2 or 3 minutes. It's a couple very simple questions. Okay, what do I hope to accomplish by the end of the day? What are my blockers? Okay, and where do I need help, basically? And if there's anything else that's particularly quick, okay, that they need to let everyone know, they could do so. In my experience, certainly over the many, 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 many years having stand-up meetings with the team, is that after this meeting, which might be just like 10 minutes, okay, every day, there's a ton of buzz of meetings and conversations that everyone has because everyone hears the blockers and they sort of whip over to their colleague and say, hey, I think I could help here. I think I could help there, or whatever. People come and ask questions. You talked about such and such. I think I've got some input for you. So there's all kinds of stuff that just having the stand-up meeting does. It becomes a lot easier to cascade information in a way that's actually personal as opposed to just an email, which we or texting, which or Slack, which is we all love, but it's just a different channel in. Another way is to do one-on-ones. Okay. And maybe you did one-on-ones every month when you're live. Okay. But the purpose of the one-on-ones are not just the official check-ins, but it becomes a way to model and discuss, not discuss, but to model and to demonstrate kind of the culture in action, right? Because this is where perhaps some degree of serendipity can actually happen in conversations. So that's the one-on-ones, doing them a little bit more. Um, Another concept that can help is skip manager meetings. So the idea is that once every quarter, once every 6 months, each person has a meeting with their manager's manager. And the purpose of this is once again just to reinforce cultural practices. Also allows the skip managers to kind of learn about what's happening on the ground, which is very important. In larger organizations, it's also a great way to sort of highlight some of the things, and it helps identify some of the people with higher potential for potential other projects as well. Okay, but this is a very, very important indicator of a reinforcement mechanism. I think there's two other things that have got a bit of short shrift. Certainly over the years, the investment, certainly within the largest organizations in training and development, has been cut, and for financial reasons. Okay, and then it started to come back a little bit where, well, let's see about we'll do a webinar or we'll do a very specific thing, and then that's it. And what I'd suggest is that the role of training isn't just to embed particular skills with a very specific people, kind of like a bit of a just-in-time kind of approach. And there's merit in that, and that's the reason why you do it. But there's a second very important aspect to training that we kind of forget. It brings people together in one way or the other, and it becomes another reinforcement mechanism for the kind of culture that you're looking to have. And so, yes, you'll bring people in for specific meetings, but that's one way of doing it. But when you have the training effect, those two things are happening almost the same way. Okay, and so I think that's the training is one thing, and coaching is another one. Because sometimes people don't know. Certain leaders don't know what they don't know, and certain managers actually don't know what they don't know either. Yeah, yes, management training will help, but sometimes, we need to work with somebody to actually make that happen. Um, okay. I guess maybe I'll mention one other thing about training and messaging. The question is, where does this all come from? Okay, because if, for example, and I know a number of people who do amazing webinars and amazing in-person training, and if you bring together a whole hodgepodge of different people, to do different types of training and different types of coaching and different types of whatever it happens to be. Okay, that'll achieve that first objective of the training. Okay, let's impart skills. But what it won't do is won't generate alignment or reinforcement of cultural practices. Because if you're able to get that alignment, it means that it reinforces what the senior leadership is looking to have happen, even if it's functional or technical training. Why? Because everyone's together and everyone's got a chance to either be pushed towards what the desired culture is, or frankly, to do nothing about it. What else have I got here? Oh, there's the idea of where does the remote work culture fit into the performance appraisal in terms of the objectives of the people? Because if the objective, okay, if one of the objectives is to achieve, so many sales or to achieve, whatever it happens to be, when it comes to an objective having to do with reinforcing the culture, the internal brand, if you will, of the organization, um, it's a mechanism that can be used. Okay. And perhaps we haven't been thinking about it in that particular way. I don't have a particular example of what a specific one would be, but it certainly could be. The final point is this. Culture is set, I believe, by expectations and behaviors. Okay, by holding people to account, okay, to make sure that yeah, and I'll give you an example. In the sales organization, um, somebody's got a quota, okay, or a service organization. There's a certain service standard, okay. But let's take the sales one because it's a little bit more stark. Somebody's got a quota of selling X dollars, okay. What happens if they don't make that quota? And what happens when they exceed it? Okay. If they don't make it, are they fired immediately? Okay. Well, maybe that's what they do. My question is what's the cultural impact of that particular behavior? Okay. When somebody exceeds it, okay, what happens? Yeah, they might get a bigger commission check. But what happens culturally? What's the message that's sent to everybody? Right? It might be that, gee, we fire people who don't measure up, and we do it in a way that sets an example and instills fear in people that if they don't hit the numbers, they're going to go, and then we start having a culture of fear, right? If we celebrate people who vastly exceed their expectations, we're reinforcing a culture of positivity and achievement, right? And so here we have the question of, okay, what's the connection with work from home, and building a very strong organization with this kind of thing? Well, thank you very much. Okay, people are alone and they can't always see some of these celebrations or some of these the opposites, etc. So there has to be the mechanism to actually make sure that these things are communicated. It may very well be that there needs to be more all hands meetings. It could very well be that there's some video interview series. It could very well be that with team meetings, the CEO drops in and shares some or listens. It could very well be, and this is probably a very, very important point. I should have mentioned it earlier, that we need to be more formal about some of the management retreats. It's not just the leadership, for example, that does this every 3 years when they're doing the strategic plan. Maybe it's got to be an all hands for 2 days in some nice place where there's a very defined program of activities that brings people in, that strengthens the relationship and reinforces the culture. So when people are once again back home by themselves, they've got this is what I'm part of. I'm part of something bigger, right? We've got a mission, right? And I'm an important part of that. And I'm working here because I've got the privilege of working from home on my schedule, etc. And I don't want to screw it up because we're doing so the idea of what happens when you bring people together, not just for like the usual meetings, but to really reinforce makes a huge difference. You know, chat, Slack, emails, um, even phone calls only go so far. They only go so far. Um, in my career, I've gone from work in the office, which I loved, to work from home, to which I loved, to hybrid, which I loved, which to bring everyone back to the office, which I loved, to we're closing the office is ridiculous. Okay, everyone's at home again. I've gone through and led organizations well before COVID that have sort of gone through all these different ways. Okay. And it's harder when some people aren't in the office or when everybody's not in the office. But what it does do is it speaks to the importance of strong management, okay, who are driven, but also empathetic. The fact that we can't just be managing by 9 to 5. We've got to be managing by achievement and by goals. And we have to invest in different ways to bring people together so that the culture that we want as leaders is the one that's built, for the organization as a whole.
Randall, you mentioned quite a few things, but number one, you talked about how in an in-person office setting, there's a lot of positive role modeling that goes on with the behavior you want. But I've seen it go both ways, where employees pick up bad habits in the office. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, you're that's actually a very insightful comment. And what I would say there is that shame on the managers of the people with the bad habits to say, hey, listen, this is a little dysfunctional. Or meh, it's very, vanilla. We could do better. Right. So this gets back to the whole question of how about some management training here? You expect people by osmosis to magically make it happen? In my career, Rania, I've worked with some incredibly talented managers who I learned some things from. I've also learned from some incredibly bad managers how precisely not to manage, how not to lead.
Yeah.
And I was, I guess, clever enough, and I've had enough management education to say, I know the difference, right? And sometimes when you've got, I call it the 70% problem. If you've got a manager that's just very average, okay, it's very hard to say, wow, that's exactly what I want to do. And it's very also hard to say, no, that was terrible, right? It was just very, very average, right? So the for the people who where you're picking up the bad habits, it's almost kind of like they then demonstrate the bad habits and more and more and more. And sometimes, there's an expression, if we just when the leadership finally says, okay, we need to make a change. We've invested in training. It hasn't made a difference. We've invested in coaching even, and it hasn't made a difference. The person's got to leave. And they get fired, and everybody sort of life becomes easy again. There isn't drama. Okay, everything is easy, etc. And why? It's because that one sort of bad apple sort of poisoned an awful lot of culture. Okay, and when that poisoning happens in a remote environment, it's hard because you can't sort of like get support from your peers as easy. You've got to make the effort to do so. You can't just say, hey, let's just go out for lunch. I'd love to talk to you about such and such. I've got a challenge, right? Or hey, can we walk around the block and just talk about an issue of some sort? So this is this is a challenge, but the challenge isn't with the bad apple. The challenge is with those who manage the bad apples. Okay, and skip meetings that kind of helps. Skip manager meetings that can help, right? And frankly, deciding it. By the way, sometimes a bad apple is an interesting thing. If you've got a senior leader who says, we need to drive sales, that's the number one thing. Then you got a sales manager who just cracks the whip on all the salespeople in a way that is just extruding them, okay, et cetera, et cetera. And they're a terrible manager, but he or she is getting results by all this bad management, okay? So is that bad management? Or is they only know what they know, and therefore you know they can't try other ways to get and make a little bit better work environment. Like, we don't want to make it, everybody doesn't have to be happy all the time, right? It's just so long as we're getting better and better. um I had I'm not very good at golf, but many years ago, I thought that I would get better, and I was very busy. I hadn't played golf. I'm always going like this and like this. It was terrible, terrible at golf. I loved it, but I was terrible at it. And so I thought to myself, I'm not going to play for 2 years. And then I came back to it. But I thought to myself, I'm going to come back, but I'm going to take lessons from the golf pro. Not a bad idea. I invested myself. I take some training. I'll be a better golfer. What a surprise. I was. And I said to the golf pro, how is it that I could be a better golfer now after not golfing for all this time? And what he said is, number one, you forgot a bunch of your bad habits. And I'm helping you develop good habits. Okay. And if we are just doing the bad habits over and over and over, it starts reinforcing that, and that becomes core culturally to us as individuals. And it becomes sadly a part of the cultural landscape as well. We don't have the opportunity to say, don't do your job for 2 years, and we're going to get a golf pro or a coach, whatever, in to sort of help you and everything. But what we can do is we can say, let's move the peanut little bit at a time here, and from a lot of different directions. So good question.
Randall, you said you loved working in the office, working remotely, hybrid, all the combinations. That being said, having led teams of all different types, do you think there's a type of person who is like best suited for a work from home role or a work from home team? And if there is an awareness of that, should companies be hiring for those traits?
That's a good question. I haven't considered that before, but since you ask it, I think personalities come in all different shapes and sizes, right? And some people are naturally extroverted and they like to be around people because that's what gives them energy to be good at what they're going to do. And then there's other people who are more naturally introverts and just need time by themselves in order to do the best at what they're going to do. But if we look at all the different leaders around the world, like political leaders, people historically, some of them have been introverts and some of them have been extroverts, and they all sort of found their way to their greatness. I believe that if you know that you're introverted, excuse me, and back in the day when everything was work from the office, you found ways to get that space, so that you can function without the everything going on, okay? And I think that for many extroverts who found themselves at home, they kind of found ways of addressing that as well. I think the important thing as a manager, okay, as a leader, is to recognize that everybody's an individual. And the question isn't, how can you do this generically, or how do we hire generically, but rather for each person who's a great fit in your organization, what is it that they need to get to that next level, to truly, truly reach their potential, right? And so for people who like to be around people who need the energy, and I'm kind of one of those. Okay, what can you have? Can you have a cocktail hour, a virtual cocktail hour? Every 2 weeks or every month, for example, which is a little bit of a fun kind of thing. Get yourself a grape juice. There's no drinking and driving here. Everybody's at home, right? And make it a fun thing, right? And those people graduate, sort of find their way to that kind of thing. But the introverts, are you kidding? No, they're not going to do that, right? So what can you do to make them comfortable and more productive in their particular space as well, right? So understanding that people are different, okay, and that we want to look at people individually, not just as a class, a generic class, I think that holds a certain clue to that. And who has the keys? It's each individual person's manager who's responsible for getting the most out of and developing the people that report to her or to him.
Randall, in a virtual work environment, meetings are often recording, right? For different purposes. People just have their AI bots automatically on in case they need to reference the meeting for their own purposes, to share with a client, to share with a colleague, to share with a manager, for future onboarding, for training, all those things. Um, I see this, tell me, maybe you could speak to this, how this practice of recording meetings is in a way stifling development of relationships because people are not gonna, tell the story, tell the personal share, tell the joke, because they know that the recording is going to be seen by who knows who. On that note, we're going to break here for this part one on our Q&A on developing your culture with work from home and hybrid teams. We'll pick up with more Q&A in part two, but if anything we've talked about so far resonates with you, if you're curious about business coaching, about creating more alignment on your team, if you're planning a leadership retreat, do reach out. We'd be happy to have a conversation and share resources. You can email us at info@randallcraig.com or book a call with Randall at www.randallcraig.net/30. See you back for part two.